Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daniel from Esper, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's webinar, which I'll be moderating, looking at crisis communications from a waste management perspective. This webinar is an initiative of Esper's working group on communications and social issues. In this working group, we address public concerns comprising public support of and public opposition to waste management policies, public consultation and participation, and communication with a focus on basic human attitudes towards waste. We decided to organize this webinar to highlight one of the less often considered aspects of waste, and that's communications. Today, we'll look at best practices, techniques, and guidance to support the industry in difficult times and times of rapid change and development. We'll ask what makes people perceptive to communications in times of crisis and consider how the waste industry can positively communicate change and development and how to get local communities on side. We'll be joined by 3 experts who will briefly introduce and discuss the topic, followed by a short Q&A with the audience. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, just put your comments in the questions box to the right of your screen. There's 2 boxes, chat and questions. If you put it in the question box, that helps us kind of moderate it. So before I kind of introduce our speakers, I'll just give you a little introduction to Esper, since many of you might not be familiar with us. So first of all, thank you to all of our sponsors, Veolia, the City of Rotterdam, IFAT, and Ecomondo, and also to our Platinum members, too many to mention. This webinar comes to you for free. We make it free because part of Esper's mission is the development of sustainable waste and resource management through education and training. We want to promote the appropriate and best available technologies and practices, and ensure that proper waste management is available for everybody. However, we do this for free, and we rely on the support of our members to be able to do this. I know there are many of you listening today who are not yet members, so I do encourage you to go to our website, check out our membership offer, and join us. You can find that at isper.org/membership. ISWA is a global independent non-profit association working in the public interest to promote and develop sustainable and professional waste and resource management worldwide. We have members in 110 countries representing the public, private sectors, academia, non-governmental organizations, and even individuals with an interest for waste management. So if you share our vision and mission, then please do join us. And finally, and with that, I would like to ask our speakers to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Tom.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Tom de Bruiker and I'm working as a communications advisor in Antwerp, in Belgium. I work for a public waste management organization for which the city of Antwerp is the biggest shareholder, and we run a waste to energy plant treating the residual waste of a little bit more than 1 million citizens. And I'm also the chair of the working group on communications and social issues of ISWA. So if any one of you would be interested in joining our working group, you are most welcome, and you will find all the information you need on the website.
Thank you, Tom. Georgina.
Oops. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Georgina Nietzsche. I'm based currently in Vienna, in Austria, where ISWA used to have its headquarters before it moved. I'm here representing the Women of Waste task force of ISWA, and I'm also the representative for ISWA Austria, national member on the communications team. Today I'm going to give a presentation about some of my own personal experiences of crises from the development world, so not specifically on waste management, but plenty of lessons learned that can be applied, I think, to anything. Looking forward.
Thanks, Georgina. And finally, Anna.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ana Lorreiro. My daily job is to work as communication manager at EGF in Portugal, taking care of waste management issues and communication. But I'm also a member of the board, representing national members in ISWA, and member of APES, which is a Portuguese national member. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. So next, we're going to have a short presentation from Tom. So Tom, would you like to take over?
Yep. Thank you, Daniel. So I said I've been working in the waste management sector for over 25 years now, and I had to deal with several crises and challenges over the years. Actually, I could say that my work for a waste to energy plant has been one consecutive series of crises over the years. And as an introduction to the other two respected speakers, colleagues, I would like to share some more or less theoretical thoughts based on my experience and also on an interesting article I read by coincidence a few weeks ago on LinkedIn. So communication about waste management is special, and it's even more special when you're in a crisis situation. We're talking about a topic, about a sector which people find particularly unappealing or even threatening, and at best they don't have any opinion at all about it. And in certain situations, for instance, when talking about waste-to-energy plants, it becomes even an outright confrontation with opponents, a clash between believers and non-believers. And what do we most of the time do then as a waste management sector? We anxiously try to justify ourselves, we defend ourselves, and we think that communications is a kind of battle that we absolutely need to win. And then we go to war with all kinds of studies and research, and we bombard people with reports and figures and with strange sounding chemical formulas with nanograms and milligrams. We are convinced that science is on our side, and we know that we are right, and we absolutely want to show this. But, ladies and gentlemen, but much more important than being right is that the people around us, our stakeholders, are also convinced that we are right and believe what we say. We claim that we are transparent all the time and that we are in dialogue with our stakeholders, but in fact, we are often not. And why is it? Because we talk side by side. Our sector is rational, factual, and the party on the other side of the barrier is emotional. They're not rational at all, and we pay way too little attention to that. How can you deal with strong emotions in communication? The first tip is look at the need behind the communications. If you have angry protesters against a waste-to-energy plant or a dump site, or teenagers nowadays protesting for climate, emotions sometimes can run very high and affect also how people behave. And as communication professionals in the waste management sector, we have to deal with this, or we have to advise our management on how to deal with this. And that's not always easy. The national reaction is to zoom in very strongly on the emotion or the associated behavior, but not to look at the underlying needs. And as said, we usually get very defensive and bombard our target group with rational arguments. And this is now today even more the case in a crisis situation, because we rely on procedures, on manuals, on reports, on Q&As, and often we are afraid to say something wrong. And unfortunately, this often has very little effect, and often it remains a very deaf conversation. Now, emotion is a response to expressing a certain need, and in our communication, we should therefore try to respond better to those deeper lying needs and values. We don't do this, but we should. And now I come to this article which I read. It was based on a research that was done by the behavioral team of a Dutch public management organization. They came up with a mechanism based on 5 important needs. The first emotional important need is autonomy. People need autonomy. People want to feel that they are always in control and that they can still determine the way that they go. They don't want to do something just because somebody else tells them to do so. So how do you deal with this? You can respond to this by stimulating self-confidence. Tell people what's in it for them. Who do we do this for, and why do we do this? Or you can redefine the relationship and take them on board as allies. So let's take a look at the challenge together. Or you can offer them choices and alternatives so that they still feel that they are in control themselves and that they feel autonomous. The second emotion is recognition. It's obvious people want to feel heard. They want to feel appreciated. They want to feel valued. So how do you deal with this? You respond to this by showing that you are really listening, and instead of interrupting people and coming up immediately with your Q&A and with your studies. You show that you understand what people are saying, and you show some empathy. And you don't just respond all the time with figures and tables and numbers, because especially numbers are most of the time meaningless to people. There's just an average, and they say nothing about how an individual experience those numbers or the facts who are behind it. The third feeling, or the third emotion, according to the Dutch research, is justice. And it's obvious again, people want to be treated fairly. Nobody wants to be feel mistreated. So people want to be treated fairly. They often do not listen to a legal or scientific explanation, but they rely on their gut feeling. So if you know that, you respond to this by keeping things clear. People don't like complex explanations, complex systems, complex reports. When they don't understand you right away, they will give up, or they will even become suspicious. So it's actually really simple. Avoid difficult language. Make your presentations in simple language, and finally be honest, even if you don't know the solution or the answer. A fourth emotion is security. Again, a no-brainer. People want to be secure, they want to be safe. And certainly if they think that their current situation is already safe, they will be really hesitant to make a choice which may have consequences that will bring them uncertainty. People are afraid of change, and this is now even more the case during the whole COVID pandemic, because a lot of other things and habits in our daily life already became uncertain. So people are even more afraid now of change than before. And what can help then is for you to radiate reliability and show that the expertise that you have in-house is real and is concrete, not again with reports and statistics, but show the faces, not say, hey, we have an abstract organization like a university or a tech consultancy or an engineering consultancy, but show the faces, show the people behind it, and offer guarantees with tangible and measurable facts. Say, hey, we will improve the air quality with measurable factor. We will save a certain amount of CO2 with an equivalent of X cars. Compare it also to things that people understand. The fifth and last emotion is that is connection. People, humans are group animals. They love harmony, and they like to be in a group. And the flip side of that is when you threaten the group, then the worst comes out. So if you deal with this, you have to focus on the middle group always. Don't focus on one individual. Avoid stigmatizing, avoid contradiction, avoid confrontation. But on the other hand, you should not be afraid of a single negative reaction or a single negative post on social media. We see it very often, individuals who post something negative on social media, and immediately you feel the urge to respond and to get into a confrontation. Well, don't do it. Monitor it closely and keep in mind that you often only hear the loudest yells from both sides. So in the end, what it boils down to is just one thing: you have to make contact. So if you realize that reducing these intense emotions is not a goal itself, it's about discovering what the people on the other side, your stakeholders, what they actually need and where the problem is. And you will only be able to find out if you make a connection. So keep in mind that people, they are not communicators, you are the communicator. So people have not learned how to communicate what they need in a communicative way. And even for people to expose their emotional needs, that makes them vulnerable again. So if you make sure that you provide a safe environment for them, you also have to stick to this. Never betray the trust that you will get from other people. And as mentioned again, once for the last time, flooding people with nothing but facts, it's not a good idea. It even can be tricky in a conversation. People might translate these facts and figures to their own situation, and in the end, it could even backfire. So realize that for every expert that proves that 1 and 1 is 2, I can find you somebody on the internet who claims it is 3 within the hour. And in a world with an information overload, with social media everywhere, with fake news everywhere, it is increasingly difficult to distinguish the reality from fiction. So how do you deal with this? One way to make real contact with people is storytelling. It's all about storytelling. People get carried away by a story. So take them along on your journey and get closer to their feelings and facts. and tell them a story. And then you can get to the heart of what really matters for people. And in that way, you create a dialogue where not everyone is necessarily on the same opinion or on the same side, but where at least you have a kind of mutual understanding and where there is honest listening to each other's point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, for the very interesting presentation. We will, if you do have questions specifically for Tom and that presentation, we will address them all at the end in the Q&A after we've given all 3 presentations. So now I'd like to hand the floor to Georgina.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Tom, for this, because many of the discussion points you made there will become, very clear with the examples I'm going to give a little bit from my own experience in development world. Let me just forward you first. My background, actually, I come to talk to you today, is about 20 plus years in the field of human development and security. So when I speak to you about some of the experiences I've had with crisis communication, it's been in Bosnia in post-war Dayton Peace Accord times, talking about elections in specific, and I have an example from that. Working with women's access to elections gave me the chance to actually work more with women, and I've had the chance to travel and work with women from Afghanistan to Zanzibar, and also finally working more for the environment, which I think is probably closer to the topics today, with the United Nations Development Programme in Tehran. So I have some examples, which, and I'll point out the nexus of what you were saying, Tom, as we come to it. I've had experience with disruption of supply, disruption at the facility, in some cases, car bombs. For example, this one's actually just attacking a building. And culture change has been, in this case, very much to do with political change. And I think that's something we should maybe talk about in the question section. One of the things I think is very strong, which I haven't had to deal with, is attack on reputation to do with social media, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, all these different issues that come out nowadays, very much enhanced by social media. But this is very much to do with development case. So the first example I want to give you is my time at municipal elections in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I don't know if we have anybody listening from that country. I was stationed in Tuzla. This was a very hotly contested election between Bosniaks, Croats, and Serbs. And you can imagine after the war, there was a lot of tension, and the elections were a chance for people to be heard, as you mentioned, Tom, to have their voice and to have their vote. My responsibility was to take care of all the polling stations, several hundreds across a region around Tuzla. And the organization I worked for then had not managed to print the ballots, or they had been printed incorrectly, and they had also been not delivered on time. So you can imagine the doors were not open. And voters came, they were banging on the doors, those behind them were trampling over them, journalists were freaking out, our voices being subdued, and those actually inside the polling station were very afraid because they could hear the mob outside. My job was suddenly answering telephone calls to journalists, to politicians, to the own staff on the inside, to people who just got the telephone number, citizens, voters themselves, and everybody wanting to know what had happened. I had no formal training in this, but I kept icy cool in this moment. I have decided that the best thing to do in a hot situation is to keep extra cool. I have answered questions, taken responsibility for the organization, said what is happening, and kept in touch and kept the story going, listened to people who were very afraid, and provided a telephone number for people to get information. So I think that maybe touches what you were saying, Tom, about taking people's concerns seriously, even if they've no idea. People didn't understand that ballots had to be printed on a certain type of paper. They were not technical experts. They didn't understand about how they had to be driven up with security, with tanks actually that slowed the whole process down, and really taking time to let people speak and give the answer as factually, as technically neutral as possible really helped. But I would say that this situation was calmed. We managed to get local staff who are respected and known, like school teachers, even people who are known from the pharmacists and doctors, to come out to polling station and appeal for calm. So we were able to leverage people who also had trust. And we got through this because the organization was well respected and had built up a lot of trust actually already. This was essentially a 24-hour crisis. We were able to get the support of international community, even of the international security forces, to come and support us. But I want to give you an example of another case which I lived through in Iran, which actually was an absolute opposite. This was the Green Movement in Iran. I was there with the United Nations Development Programme, as I mentioned, and this is the Green Movement actually is a political movement about, again, hotly contested elections. Maybe some of you are familiar with the name Ahmadinejad. Maybe we even have some people here from Iran who remember this time. It was again about a group of voters who believed that their votes were not being taken seriously, were not being counted. And as you said, Tom, people who feel that they are being squashed into a corner react very strongly. As you see here, many women and men were marching on the streets. There was a lot of people who were imprisoned, jailed, executed even. And this was a very, very tense time. And what has this got to do with me? I was working for the United Nations, and the British were actually held accountable for this. It was a kind of faceless blame placed on British people, and working for the UNDP became untenable. Nobody would meet with me. I am British. Nobody would have meetings for me in case it would be seen as spying or being fed information and put them in danger. Nobody would respond to my emails, and as increasingly that happened to the whole international community. People were silently having their passes taken back, and one by one Brits were asked to leave, the BBC, Shell, even DHL. So it became a very tense time. Projects stopped, work stopped, and nothing changed. No conversation took place. There was no person to call. There was no information. Absolutely opposite of what Tom has just said is the antidote. And slowly, this flame continued to burn stronger and stronger, until eventually the blame was put on the British side. There were this is apparently a picture of a spontaneous protest, but actually there were buses of protesters brought outside the embassy. There were trucks of hand-sized stones brought, and you see there that the mob were just releasing all of this tension, and this is absolutely destructive. So the staff were frightened. The much damage done to the property, and this is for me a crisis of communication, because eventually the whole programs were stopped by the United Nations. That is, programs that were about biodiversity, about CO2 prevention, programs for cleaning up plastics from the Caspian Sea. So very good work was essentially halted because of a scapegoat of the UK embassy. And I indeed left with my family at certain point because it became useless to stay there and be a problem for the staff. So although you may be thinking, okay, this is not directly related to waste management, I think you see that there's some common factors with what Tom was just saying. And I can say my personal lessons learned from these two crises is that firstly, they happen quietly and quickly, but also very slowly. And one needs to keep icy calm. What strategies worked well is to take responsibility. You see that with the Iranian situation, there was no face, nobody to call to. My recommendation, certainly my experience from Bosnia, is to give reassurance. People are looking to hear and to know what's going on, who has control or who's taking control. And my feeling is that when people don't know what to think, they will think the worst. And that's what you were just saying as well, Tom. You know, if people don't know enough about the situation, they will always think the worst. Two other things I think matter a lot is that you need to communicate with the internal staff as well as your external audience. Now it's even more important than ever, with everybody being a citizen journalist who has a mobile phone. I think it's really important to reassure your own internal staff, tell them what's happening, when it's going to happen, and be consistent, deliver on what you say, and ask them also to be supportive. You don't want to have rogue information coming out from your team because they're not being looked after. And what I learned really, actually overall, which I think is really super important, is you need to build your trust capital as an organization well in advance before any crisis can happen. Because like a bank account, it will be used in a communication crisis, and anybody who's not on your side, who's a potential enemy, will use your crisis against you. So you need to have strong trust capital with many actors, not only those in your business, but in your network, but also those other stakeholders as well. So I hope that's given you a little bit of an insight into the variety of let's say crises that can happen, and maybe you get some inspiration that it's really important to be prepared for a crisis before it happens. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Georgina. And we'll move over to our final presentation, which is from Anna.
Hi, everybody. I will share my screen. Oops. Sorry, I'm having problem sharing. Can I ask you to help me on the sharing of the screen? Thank you. Okay, so I will focus all what my colleagues have already said, but very focused on waste management issues, giving some examples and a bit of my experience related to this. Can you pass a slide, please? Okay, first, what is a crisis of communication? So a crisis is a negative event, of course, with the potential to negatively affect an organization's reputation or credibility, not only for the people who work there, but for the organization itself. So we all have faced crises in some point, so thinking that they will never happen is a very big mistake. So we must always be prepared in order to understand that somehow, some time of the year, in some time of the time that we are working there, the crisis will happen for sure. What defines a crisis? First, it appears suddenly. You are not expecting, makes hasty decisions, normally generates situations of uncertainty and panic. There is always an imminent lack of control, and also there is a lot of noise. So please be aware that you need to think about this on your business before and be prepared to all those things that might happen. And I'm going to give you some examples. Please move forward. Okay, so normally we know by many studies that the predictable crisis represents almost 90% of the cases. The unpredictable are really normally big things like earthquakes and big crises that we are not expecting. So when we say we predict, we cannot say the day, the hour that will happen, but we can make scenarios and we can be prepared to respond to those scenarios. Okay, next slide, please. So there are many kinds of crises, and this crisis happens in almost lot of organizations. So public accidents, please, I'm sorry, I'm not controlling the presentation. I would like you to put everything, please. Public accidents, judicial actions, consumer actions, product defects, dismissal of executives, this might happen sometime, financial damages, fusions and acquisitions, sex crimes, crime reports, corruption, workplace violence, all of these can happen, and many of these examples are not related to the business itself. It's something that might happen, and you can at least predict scenarios from the communication point of view. Next slide, please. Okay, so the big answer is really to be prepared. And keeping contact lists up to date make it easier. When the crisis happens, we never know where these lists are. So please keep it close in a very easy place to find, and have them all accurate in order to be used whenever necessary. Of course, we need also to have pre-prepared answers and make these kind of scenarios, not only the general ones, but specific to our business, what can happen. Make this exercise with the people company, and please think about it and be prepared with the Q&A and all the context you need. Of course, when an accident or something very unexpected happens, it's very good to have pre-authorized decisions. If big decisions can trigger responses more effective, and at least make sure that when these big issues for you and your business takes place, you have already thought about it and you have made these pre-decisions because it will be faster to respond to those crises. Okay, next slide, please. So the first reaction normally is safety. When it's an accident, it's a very big problem, safety first. And of course, in an event like an emergency, make sure to keep everybody safe. So I think this is obvious. But if we go to communication, and I like to, next slide, please. When we talk about the communication, you can have a kind of procedure, general procedure. The first one normally is to be discreet. When you know about a crisis, don't react immediately. Don't do it by heart. Don't do it when everything is on fire. You have to be discreet in order to not comment, expand, or broadcast. Sometimes we cannot control our emotions at the moment when we know about it, and we tell everybody before we have even think about it and what kind of solution we are going to give. Remember, I'm talking about communication, not about the problem itself. When you are aware of it, so be sure that you be discreet and you think first before starting shouting or starting saying things. Another one is to inform management and communication department. Normally, many crises are detected by our employees and they don't have a procedure to do this. So please be sure that you implement a procedure for crisis on communication and every of your employees know what to do and who to tell. Because if this is not defined, they will tell everybody or they will tell the wrong person to deal with this kind of crisis. The third topic would be ask for directions. Namely, if you are not in the top level of the company and you need directions to do it in the proper way. Another point would be to gather relevant information. Sometimes we forget. We need to think as a journalist and to gather the kind of information we want to put outside. So when it happened, sometimes it's even important to have the hour, not sometimes it's not. If there are injured people, please collect the facts, everything you have about that specific crisis, because sometimes the crisis is not an accident, it's something very small. So you need to gather the information and choose the right facts and the most important ones. And last but not least, be available. It's very annoying when you have a communication crisis and nobody knows who to contact. So be sure that your webpage has the right contacts for the media. Be sure that if you can connect and give easily a contact for those who are involved, can phone and can send an email. Okay, next slide, please. Also be ensured to have a very updated media contact place. This is also, like I said, for contacts, also for the media. As you might know, journalists, they change a lot. Sometimes they change topics. We need to know who to send the information that will properly put it out. Okay, I'm giving you now some examples. Sometimes crises are not accidents. Fortunately, most of the time, they're not. They are more small. Sometimes it's about numbers and indicators. In waste management issues, there are a lot of people wanting to know where to find this topic about a country, if they have achieved the goals. This is normally a very important point for the organization. Be sure that you have a rule for that. Only transmit numbers that are validated and from a single and official source. If you have many numbers, they conflict, they don't go well together, and this is a problem. And sometimes it's about the targets you didn't achieve or goals the country didn't meet, something that you want. It's very important for your business, but it's not well treated in your information. So be sure you communicate your indicators and your numbers properly. Next one, please. Another example happens a lot in landfills, especially in the south of Europe, When the summer starts, and but also in other countries where where we have our temperature is very high, we have during the summer fires and other accidents. So be prepared to deal with this. So one thing is also for this case of operation issues, be very close to the operation to have the relevant facts and to be sure that you have the right input from what is happening in the field. When this kind of crisis happens, there are a lot of noise about it. Okay, gather all relevant information. This also applies to this. Sometimes you have stories that it's not important to give to the outside or to the inside of your organization. Again, many media will come. I can tell you a story about this. Sometimes the media have direct contact with the firemen, and sometimes they are in the spot before the firemen themselves and our employees, depending on the place where the landfill can be located. So be sure you track all the media contacts to phone them back and give them the relevant information. And of course, monitor and report all developments. If this is something going on, everybody wants to know. Probably we will have television. They are broadcasting live what is happening. And again, have a very validated procedure, and be sure to have only a single spokesperson. It's very normal to happen, because if you have different facilities in different places, be very sure that you need only one person speaking, or else the possibility and the variety of informations will just make a mess on your communication to the outside world. Another example. I'm going to talk to you about election periods. This is normally, why should this be a problem? For many of us, this is a problem. For those who have waste management facilities, and I'm sure you will all agree with me, when there is an election period, somehow our facilities starts to make bad odors. It smells bad. I don't know. It's a miracle. After the election period, they start to smell better. So making this as like a miracle, it's not a miracle. And of course, we have to accept that this happens and other phenomena happens, and be sure that you are going to be visited. You will be visited by different political parties. Be open, receive them with the board, show them the facilities, be transparent. Many people are suspicious about our activity, and we don't have nothing to hide. So please show them how it works, that the waste management facilities simply transforms waste collected into energy, into recycling products, into everything that we want, circular economy. So be sure to be transparent and to show them and show your facilities. Also inform relevant stakeholders. Be sure that normally they want to be there to explain, to show what we are all doing. And receive and track all media contacts. They will be very necessary for you, for sure. Another example. Now I'm going to talk to you about strikes. Well, strikes, it's a very specific type of crisis that happens in some countries and makes waste management very visible in the worst way. So normally we get visible in the streets. When everything goes well, nobody can see us and everybody is very happy with our work. But when we have a strike, some things like this happen. So have a team composed by human resources and communication to be sure to give numbers. Journalists will ask for numbers of how many people are in strike, why is this happening, receive and track all media contacts, monitor and report all developments. They will be necessary for you. Be aware of the internal impact. Sometimes the external crisis is already over, but we have an internal crisis that can be very hard to manage. So be sure that you are looking both sides, but never forget that we are in the same place the next day, and sometimes our employees the relation might get lost. So we need to know how to separate our role when dealing with the crisis and playing personal relationships, because on this type of crisis, people tend to have different positions, and sometimes it's hard to, after the crisis, be sure that everything goes well. So, and to finalize, I would like to give you an example. This is a video. If you can click on the blue. This is about COVID-19. This has been a huge crisis since last year. So we have made some videos and use of the social media networks to exemplify how to deal with waste management in our houses and our facilities, and giving examples and saying people that they should not throw the masks to the floor, to the containers for separate collection, and giving them examples and instructions on how to do it the best way. And I would like to ask to put our topics, please. So we need strong internal communication to the employees, making sure that they comply with every procedure, partner with relevant stakeholders, and here municipalities have a very important role, have these social media campaigns, clear messages, don't put too much topic with very complicated words, make it simple as possible, and implement the quick feedback channels from the operation. So, we have made very specific messages regarding problems we had in the streets, because our operation could send to us very problems with the operation they were having at the time, and we were able to manage and to give information back. So this is an example of a postcard that we have put in all our facilities on how our workers should behave and do in the facility. Please put everything. Okay, thank you. We use emails, SMS, and other communication tools, but also social media. We have to understand that now people are more at home. We need to contact them where they are, and they are on their phones. So we need to give them messages as quickly as possible with very clear instructions. And be sure to have in your website relevant information with facts, frequent asked questions about what to do in case you have COVID, how you should deal with your waste management every day. We have this in my company for Portuguese, English, and Spanish. And we also had a campaign with our own workers. They have made these photographs. We put them everywhere, saying thank you to them. But they want to say to people that we are working for you. Stay at home for us. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope my experience with this topic made it somehow, it was somehow a help for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that also comprehensive presentation. I think now that all of our audience should be communication professionals by now. We had a few questions in the chat about whether you'll receive the presentations after. We will share all of the presentations with everyone in the follow-up email, and we'll also upload the recording to YouTube. So you'll all get a chance to watch it again and share it with your colleagues, or follow the presentation yourself in your own time. So yeah, don't worry about that. Now we've got about a little bit of time left for questions and answers. So please write your questions in the chat box, and I will start with some questions for well, I think I'll open it to all of the panel, whoever wants to answer it. But one of the crises we mentioned was maybe financial crises. And this was a question that came to me earlier, that when often in times of financial crisis, and maybe we are experiencing this at the moment with COVID, this kind of economic recession, the first budget to disappear is always the communications budget. So how do you make sure that budgets can be maintained through this crisis, and how do you justify continuing to spend money on communications when things are tight?
Okay, maybe I can start answering that question. I had that problem, okay. Normally it's not only communication, it's communication and learning procedures and everything that is regarding to learning. And the fact is, when you have the need, the money comes out. Of course, you need to choose. We have chosen channels that are cheaper, that we didn't went for television, because we all know that campaigns in televisions are very expensive. But the main secret is have a target. As more specific you have the target, more effectively you can choose the right channel to reach the people. And this can sometimes this is quite cheap. It's more strategic from our side. Of course, we need the money, but we can be strategic if the budget is very low. And if you have the need, for sure, the decision makers will find a way to provide the minimum budget to do things. I can give a practical example. During the COVID-19, we had problems with some municipalities about rules on how to use the containers. Some of them, we had population motivated by normal fear of COVID that didn't want to touch the containers, and they start to tell that the tops of the containers should be always open. And this is a problem, because if you put them always open, you have a lot of the rain goes inside, animals can go inside, it will be a mess. It's a public health situation. So we knew which municipalities were doing this, so we could make a campaign on social media very directed to those municipalities. So we put a bit of budget for that, and we made it the opposite. So we managed to control the message, talk to them, and meanwhile people were aware that they should not put the tops open but the tops down. So this is a very specific message, and it was not very expensive, and it was important it was very targeted, and I think this is one of the secrets for the success.
Daniel, I'd like to just add on to something Anna is saying there, because it's very important what you're saying, but I would also say that there's not only for specific communication, very targeted, but non-specific, because we know that today in a world of social media, that once your reputation is damaged, it's very hard to repair. So I would feel that one of the arguments for maintaining a budget is for maintaining your Kat calls it in the chat, the social license, maintaining your stakeholder relationships. You can't come back and forwards from that. And a second thing is that what we already know from research in Germany is that as soon as you weaken your communications about, let's say, recycling, the recycling rates drop. So you have to maintain communications. Maybe these are two arguments you can make for budget continuance.
Maybe one very last argument or element. In order to convince the management of the organization that communications is crucial, it is important that also in non-crisis time, communications is high up in the hierarchy of the organization. We consider communication really as a strategic function, close to the management or linked to the management, and not somewhere down in the organization, just in an executive. So when communications is really high up in the organization and is also in non-crisis times is close to the management, then the management will be much more reluctant to cut budgets in crisis time.
Mm-hmm. I have another question. I think I'll start with Tom for this one, because I think you have a little bit of experience with this. But Kat asks, how do you best debunk myths and misinformation?
Yeah, that's really difficult. All the fake news that is really going around these days. The only thing that you can do is keep repeating the message over and over and over and over again until it even gets boring. But you can't repeat your message enough, and be completely transparent. But transparent not only with facts and figures, as I said, but by really giving the people real insight in your organization. The organization where I work for, ISFAC, the Intermunicipal Waste Management Organization, we have a visitor center where we welcome more than 5,000 visitors in non-COVID times. To be honest, because the last year the visits have been suspended, but in normal times we have more than 5,000 visitors per year, and each of them we really show them what we do, and repeat the same messages over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Tom, you mentioned your work with ISFAC, and maybe some people know they operate an incineration plant, which does require a lot of efforts and communications. Do you have maybe some examples from your early work with ISFAC where communications didn't go so well, but then you were able to use positive communications to divert this? Or
The fact is, I started at ISFAC in the late 90s when the incineration plant was closed, and there was a legal procedure from some people living near the plant who started a lawsuit against ISFAC, and they were really in a really deep crisis. And what was one of the elements that caused this crisis was that they did not communicate at all before. They did not. They just only fulfilled their legal obligations, which was that they had one annual report per year that they published with a whole lot of tables and figures that nobody understood. And then the judge who made the final verdict in the lawsuit said, okay, hey, I allow ISFAC to reopen the plant, but I also advise you really to start communicating with the neighbors around you and to be more transparent. And it was a judge who really, in his sentence, really literally said that please start communicating. And we started the dialogue, and it was in the beginning very hesitant and very difficult. I was hired in that period to help out ISFAC and to start this dialogue. And if I look back at the past 25 years, it has been really difficult, but step by step we're getting there.
I think this is a question probably for all of you. Maybe we'll start with Anna. NIMBY, I think it's been mentioned a couple of times, not in my backyard. It's a powerful force, and it can lead to the downfall of politicians and political parties. I mean, we saw it recently in the UK where a political party lost a position because due to a local community group opposing an infrastructure project. And it happens especially in terms of waste. You know, if, for example, a local council or region wants to develop a new composting plant, how do you successfully, and maybe you have some examples in Portugal of how you've used communications to reverse community attitudes and get them on site and get them to support the project?
Okay, first, I think we need to look at NIMBY not as a disease, okay? And I'm trying to explain this. Sometimes we have heard and listened and read NIMBY as a syndrome. It is not. It's based on the fears of the population, which are very important. We need to understand them as better as we can. People, when they react as NIMBY, they are reacting because they have fear of what? Fear of noise, fear of bad odors, fear of that their land will, the price will come down, fears of a lot of things. So we can imagine ourselves having a waste facility next to our house. So let's put ourselves in their shoes first, and then we can understand what is going on and how can we make better our own work. So I think this is really the secret. We need to put ourselves in their shoes. And when we do that, I can give you some examples of something that went well and something that didn't went well. What went well was, for instance, our incineration plant in Lisbon. Many years ago, more than 20 years ago, people didn't agree with incineration. We had people in our doors saying that the man will be impotent, that children will not born, and we had all green movements against our facility, okay? The secret here, because it was very, very tough at the time, we brought them to know other facilities in other countries with the representatives. We made a lot of presentations. People were seeing the plant being built, and today, and not many years after, we have a lot of visits to the plant. We have a lot of school projects. We have important monitoring programs to show that our activity didn't comply with all those fears they would have. And today, after 20 years, looking backwards, this is an incredible experience because we have managed to build this incineration plant in 5 years, which was a really big record for us. And the problem was solved on waste management in Lisbon in a very short period of time. So this is a very successful story we like to tell. But sometimes, like with landfills, this happens a lot. People tend to feel that landfills is the same as putting waste in a dump site. They think it's the same. They don't know the difference between one and the other. And it's very important to tell that difference. And sometimes if we don't use communication from the early beginning of the project, you can trust me, communication will not save the project. It only comes in the end. It must be a continuous procedure. I have an experience of a recent project for a landfill that it was almost everything approved for a specific location. And then we had a problem, you are going to laugh, but we had a problem with the priest, because the priest was against and he was not informed, and he put everybody against during Sunday's mass, so the Sunday event. So he was preaching against our facility in a place, a sacred place. So we couldn't go against it, and we lost it. Okay, we are now finding different problem. This was something that was not very well conducted, and we neglected that person. He was a very important leader for the community, and this is something. It's a lesson learned. We have to be very aware of who are your leaders in the communities and talk to them and give them information. This is only 2 examples.
I really like this example of people having experience with waste, like you were saying, the visitor center, or people coming to other countries to see places. That's certainly been the experience. I know ISWA before COVID was able to run these study tours, and ISWA Austria ran several of them. And what I was very impressed with is that several times we had let's say, politicians coming themselves to see and visit various different sites, whether it was bio-waste management or waste to energy. And in some cases, we even had people coming from activist groups. So you had people from opposing sides coming on the same study tour and listening to the same experts. And I think that's something I would recommend if you have the communication budget to sponsor in your community. People love it, and I think the more people get to understand waste and familiar with sustainable waste management, I think most people are fascinated by it and want to support it.
Thanks, Georgina. I think I've got a question here that maybe is quite one for Tom, because you also have a kind of communications consultant position. And this is from Kat, and she mentions that the media tend to take negative spins on stories, and positive stories are less likely to be picked up by the media. What strategies do you have to recommend kind of to improve this situation, to make sure that the positive story may be picked up?
We struggle with this as well, to be honest. Indeed, if you look at newspapers and media today, the negative news gets more attention than the positive. Nevertheless, we try, and what we do there is we try to focus on regional and local media especially, and there we also involve the local initiatives. Like, for instance, we did a kind of cleanup action with local youth movements, like Scouts. We do this now 2 times a year, and they participate, and each time they come to the plant with the materials and all the littering that they have cleaned up, and then we see that local media, luckily they pick up these stories, and each time when a story like this is told, we also include other messages about the plant, about what we do, about the district heating network, about positive effects. And luckily, in our case, we see that the relationship that we have with local journalists now, we see the results. So we see that these messages are also taken up in several articles.
Thank you, Tom. I've got another question from Ligia in Portugal. She asks what the role is of economic incentives in terms of changing behavior. Should they be used to complement, or should they be used to substitute communications? Maybe, Anna, you have some experience with this in Portugal.
Yes, and thank you, Ligia. It is, of course, important. When we choose a location, normally we are very concerned with the very technical aspects of the place. But of course, communication strategies having psychology, and of course, nudging is also something that people are talking about. We need to consider as much as possible. So knowledge is being more developed about this, and we need to hear people's perceptions. We have some studies for the incineration plan, and one of the things it's important to share here was when we started, we knew from the studies that people would accept more or less the presence of that facility if they could see the chimney on their window. So it was a quite interesting point. If the house of the person was located to the other side, they wouldn't see it every day when they woke up, they wouldn't see a problem with the facility. If they were looking at the chimney every day, so this would be a problem. And of course, this changes regard not only the location, but also the stories before, if like landfills. If you want to put a landfill in the previous place where you had a dump site, for sure you will have stories and fears from the people that we need to deal with that. So yes, it's very important, and I feel that it's a kind of a topic that will be addressed more and more for the projects.
In Belgium, this is a really sensitive area, because if for instance, if you say, hey, we want to build a new waste management plant or a waste incinerator, and then if you come up with economic incentives, then it would be considered as bribe. You want to pay us in order to get your permit, and in order to you want to buy goodwill. What we see here now in Belgium, that kind of community investment schemes where you allow citizens to become an investor in the project, and in return they get a really interesting return financially, and that is something that is now very much more popular, and also much more effective than just spending money and throwing money at them.
Okay, thanks, Tom. I'm gonna start to wrap up now. I want to ask each of you to just give me maybe a brief 1-sentence, 1-minute conclusion by answering this final question, and that's if you could give one piece of advice to the audience about how to handle crisis communication and waste management, what would it be? To sum up as briefly as possible. Who wants to go first?
I think, in my experience, own it. Own the problem and be responsible for it. People take you seriously then.
Yeah, I would say, of course, the same, but saying that communicate from the early beginning of each project. Be honest. Don't tell people lies. You will get caught. Don't do that. And do it in a very proper way. Messages very clear for people can understand them. Don't throw them away technical issues. Give them the right information the best possible way.
And I want to come back to my initial presentation. That is that communication is not a one-way process. It's not about getting your messages across. It's also about listening, and about establishing a real dialogue with whoever are your stakeholders.
Okay, thank you, Tom, Anna, Georgina. And I will just let you know we will circulate all of the presentations that we had during this webinar shortly after the conclusion. And if you do have, I see there are a few more questions unanswered, but if you do have questions, we'll include the link in the follow-up material. We do have a webpage on the Esper website for the communications working group, so you can come, you can ask us questions directly, you can join the working group as an Esper member, and you can engage with us on a more regular basis. So thank you for joining us, and see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.